All right. Well, take 7. Hi, he's Mattyman.
And he's Vannyboy, and you're listening to The Rusty Playground, a Gen X-centric podcast featuring us, Gen X, the coolest generation.
The coolest generation.
And if you didn't get that, the coolest generation.
Yes. We have to say it 3 times or we're doomed.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes. You also used to present, you want to show, and you want to speak. It's like 3 different ways of communication to learn something.
Yes, we communicate to other Gen Xers telepathically, much like Aquaman does to fish.
Meanwhile, back at the Hall of Justice.
I was thinking the same thing. Aquaman wears no shorts. Want to see my fish?
Okay.
Sorry,
think of the children.
That was us. Now we're all dirty men.
Was there something we were going to talk about here?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. On this, a very special episode of the Rusty Playground, we discuss happy days. Anyone worth his damn in Gen X knows this show, loved this show, or at least was pleasantly amused by this show. There were no haters.
Nope.
We loved it. And we're going to basically break this down into 2 sections where the beginning is our ode to happy days. And then the second is more the fridge logic, as it were, as we went to college and realized, wait a minute, the Fonz was dating teenage girls.
The Fonz was a little problematic when you get older.
But that's the essence. That's basically the essence of this.
Yes.
It's 1 episode, but it's as if you're getting 2 episodes for free.
That's right. That's how we work.
Well, it's free.
Yeah, it is free. Nobody pays for this.
I meant 2 for 1.
We're losing money hand over fist. Nobody's paying for this shit.
Yeah. I'm in financial ruin.
I feel like my grandfather did. I felt like my grandfather did when he had to buy me the Atari.
Yeah. Only I don't even have that to show for it.
That's a callback, folks.
Yeah.
So
anyway, so let's yes, happy days, the good part. Well, it's good anyway. How can you not like Henry Winkler? But anyway,
right? Everybody loves Henry Winkler. He's a national treasure, and people who, Gen Xers, we know him, of course, obviously as the Fonz, but millennials probably, well, they know him as the Fonz too. I mean, it's a pretty seminal character in television history. But they also know him as, what's his name? Bob Oblov? Is that his name on Arrested Development?
Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah. He was, forgot about that.
Yeah, there's a scene in Arrested Development where, and I love that they had him do this, or that he was willing to do this, because Henry Winkler in real life, folks, seems like the sweetest guy in the world. He really does seem like a very nice guy. I know someone who was at a book signing of his, and she worked at the book signing, and she was around him for like 6 hours. And she said he was just extraordinarily kind and pleasant to everybody. So I believe it. I believe he's a cool guy. But when they got him in Arrested Development, they had a scene and they asked him, hey, we want you to go and say something in the mirror as part of the script. And it was like wash his face or something. And when he goes up to the mirror, he looks at it. He pulls out his comb and then he stops and goes, hey, and walks out. Just, a nod about the Fonz. We'll get into that. But I just thought, how cool is this guy to not shy away from? I mean, it's like Radcliffe with Harry Potter. I mean, you were, right? So you can't just deny that ever happened and be bitter about it. He seems really cool about who he was and as a character and who he is as, he's been a producer. He's done all kinds of stuff since Happy Days. So good on him.
Yes. We could have an entire episode just about him.
We could actually. And so I'll, if you don't mind, Mattyman, I'll kick us off with sort of a breakdown of what Happy Days was for any of the uninitiated. Any Gen Xer listening to this, definitely, like you said, is at least familiar with the Fonz for sure. If not, then just why are you here?
Yeah, this is not the podcast for you.
This is definitely not.
I don't know what's for you, honestly.
I don't know what planet would be for you if you are like in your late 40s to early mid 50s. If you don't know who the Fonz is, you have to be from another country or something. I don't know, but
I mean, I would imagine that it was getting aired at different parts of the world around that time. I
yeah,
mean,
you'd have to be
you have a picture of the Fonz anywhere, like in, anywhere in Asia. I can't even think, like Aboriginal Australia. Everybody knows, right?
everybody
I'm
knows.
guessing.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe not the Amish. They may not know.
Yeah. Or the Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
But
Who knows? All right.
they're not
Let's
listening to
just,
this podcast, so we
yeah.
don't care what they think.
Yeah.
Um,
I just don't know.
yeah, so I'll
Let's
break
talk
it
about
down
something I
for
know. Yeah. Let's do
yeah.
that.
Yeah. So basically Happy Days was a sitcom in the late 70s through a good portion of the 80s. And it was set in the 1950s. I guess what, Maddie, 1955 or 56, something around there.
Yeah. I would think it's mid 50s.
Yeah. Maybe 56, 57, because
Yeah.
they
Yeah. I mean,
used rock and roll. And famously, the first two seasons of it opened up with a scene from inside a jukebox. Record hits, and it starts playing Bill Haley and the Comets, "Rock Around the Clock."
yep.
And
So that's late 50s.
yeah, well, that was came out in 1955. It was a hit in 55, recorded
Oh,
in
okay.
54. And Bill Haley, little side note, was he was the first rock and roller to ever be seen on television. They were the first rock and roll band a year before Elvis was seen. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, they were
Kind
a
of
pretty
paved the
big
way.
deal. Yeah, and they're that song "Rock Around the Clock" is often considered the first, the basically what Smells Like Teen Spirit was to grunge, or what Metal Health was to heavy metal. It's like set everything in motion for the future.
Right. And
Um,
really, like, just like those, like, really the first hit of, pure rock and roll. I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah. It
of
was,
that nature.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock, 5, 6. You've most people have heard it probably, and lots of different shows and medium and stuff. But anyway, basically they had that only for the first two seasons, and of
Which are the
course,
two that were they were really, hewing, like they were closely intertwined with their time period.
yes,
As
yes,
far as the look, the hairstyles, the costumes.
yeah. Happy Days was still feeling its way around, trying to grow, and but they started off with that as the beginning of the show, and it set the tone for everything. You knew you were in the 50s, you knew what part of the 50s you were in, and everything like that. They actually, Bill Haley and the Comets re-recorded that song for the show. And also,
Really,
yeah,
like
because
almost 20 years later.
they the original recording didn't sound all that great, right? So they also re-recorded "See You Later, Alligator," that song,
Oh,
um,
okay,
and for it.
cool.
Those first several years, they would play classic. When I say classic rock, that means something totally different now. But in the 70s and 80s, when you would say classic rock, you meant 1950s stuff. And so they had
What they started calling oldies.
right oldies, right, and they used to play Elvis, Hound Dog. That was used a lot, and Richie, whenever it was a girl he was gonna make out with or whatever, or who was showing interest, he'd be like, "I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill." So they were intertwined with the music of the time. But as the show went on later on, unless Anson Williams or Scott Baio, Susie Quattro, or Aaron Moran, any of the Moran, whatever, any of the actors, unless they sang, it was usually just an instrumental in the background. So obviously they didn't want to pay for the rights to these songs anymore. So
And then really, it didn't serve its purpose anyway for them because they were going into being more of a broad comedic sitcom feel. It
yeah,
was no longer like a slice of life of that time. It was a very loose framework.
yes, yeah. The first couple years, each episode wasn't. It was like you said, a slice of life. Each episode wasn't a first act, second act, and third act in it. It basically kind of would have multiple things going around, almost like little snippets. They may have three little snippets of things, three or four little snippets of things that happen in the show. So it still hadn't like settled into what we know as each episode having a theme throughout. It wasn't quite there yet. They were still trying to feel their way. And those were actually, I always loved all of them, but those were the ones whenever I would come home from school in the afternoon and I'd turn on, we only had the three channels. So I'd turn it on and you'd hear, if you heard 1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock rock, I was like, yeah, these are the early ones. These are the old ones. And if you heard Sunday, Monday, happy days, you're like, well, whatever. I'll watch it anyway.
Yeah. See, I was by the time I'm really getting into Happy Days, it's after it's made the transition. So seeing the reruns from the first couple seasons, which were actually 74 and 75, that's when they went that far back with these.
Wow.
It was it felt so different to me. It felt like, okay, you got to really watch this. This isn't just a goofy thing. There's like actual storylines. There's some gritty moments, like, okay, the one where the Fonz entrusts Richie to look after the girlfriend, and Richie ended up kissing her. And so he had to tell the Fonz what he did. And then the whole episode is, the Fonz is going to have to hit him at some point.
Right.
Do you remember any of that? Any of that one?
I don't remember that one. No.
Hey, my wife says she remembers it. And the one where basically he said, where do you want it? You want it in the face or in the gut? And eventually,
so let me guess. Let me guess. Without you telling me, let me guess. He said, in the face, I guess. So Fonzie went to do it, and he just lightly touches him on the chin.
Maybe.
Maybe you don't even remember.
It sounds like that's probably how it really went down.
It probably did. I doubt.
Yeah.
I doubt we had an in-depth scene of the Fonz using his left leg to trip Richie's right leg. As he falls down, he just jumps on top and just starts just punching his face until his fists are pulp. That's what you get for kissing my girlfriend. I only have 7,000 more.
I don't know if this is like gunk from your face or from my hand.
You're right. I don't know if this is my fist bone sticking, a knuckle sticking out of my skin, or if this is your tooth. Sorry, Red.
Yeah.
But it was obviously
next week he'll just have a couple of Band-Aids on.
Yeah, it'll be all right. So yeah, those first couple seasons had a different feel, but they were, it's kind of interesting to go back and watch it, and you see how, Fonzie didn't even have his leather jacket in that first season.
Right.
He just had whatever cloth that was that he wore.
Yes, there's a name for that jacket. There's a name for it.
It looks almost like a members only jacket without the.
It was a gray. It's a gray McGregor windbreaker.
Yeah, I always thought it was cool.
Yeah, it's not bad. It just was. That's what James Dean is wearing.
Yeah, right.
So they went with that. Then when he decided he wanted to have the leather jacket, at first, they were like they weren't keen on that because they thought he would look too rough.
Too rough.
Family friendly, but at the same time, if you look at the early episodes, they showed a lot of outside the diner footage, and you see a lot of gangs. You see a lot of different greased rockers in those scenes. So I guess at some point they just realized, he's bringing in the numbers at this point.
Right. Yeah. Because when they that segues great into the next point, which is Fonzie wasn't really supposed to be a big part of the show to begin with. And when they conceived the show, he was just, kind of like, in other shows where they would just show up at the diner and they have it's almost like Fraser Crane, for example, in Cheers, where he was just a bit character that would add some flavor here or there in the episodes. And then, he wasn't that big of a deal, but he quickly stole the show. And, it could have been called the Fonzie Show, really, because he was the main guy without question. And
there's another reason why that happened too. Because at some point Ron Howard was leaving because he wanted to get into a directing career. So once he was sort of written off, like he went in the army.
Yeah, but that was years later.
I know, but that was just it. Once Fonzie was already popular, but once it got to the point where Ron Howard wasn't even on the show, well, then he's carrying the entire show at that point.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And
It's
they,
definitely the Fonzie show by then.
yeah, they had gotten to the point when they were maybe 5 or 6 seasons into it where, they weren't, it was hard to hide the fact that they had, 1979 hair. They were slicking it
Mhm.
back and everything, but it was still pretty long for what they had then. They didn't really want to keep their hair cut short and stuff, I guess,
Yeah.
because they were regular people living in this funkified 70s. So,
Yeah.
but the
Well,
show,
you,
so,
go
so
ahead.
I was just going to say, so the show, started out as we just said, kind of a slice of life here or there, and it eventually settled into, what we would normally think of as a sitcom. They had the family that Fonzie lived over top of, and that was the Cunninghams, of course, because Richie was his best friend, and they had the mom and dad, Howard and Marion Cunningham, who I liked both of them, but Marion in particular was cool, and she was kind of like a mother figure for the Fonz, who didn't really have a family. His
And
dad
she was
left
the
when he
only
was
one
3.
who could call him by his actual
Arthur,
name.
yeah, she called him Arthur. That's right. I forgot. He was cool with it. He was charmed. She'd fix him, a bagged lunch, and he'd give her a little, that little tap on the. He'd always blush and stuff when she'd say stuff to him. So he was, he really appreciated her, and which is interesting that he respected this this married woman so much because wow, did he run through the women? But we'll get to that. But he
Yeah.
and they had, of course, Richie lived there, and they had the youngest sister, Joni, which was played by Erin Moran, who was a bit crazy in real life. But they also had Chuck, the oldest brother, Chuck Cunningham. You remember
Yeah.
Chuck, don't
He
you?
was he already? Yeah. I remember him only because of those early episodes.
Right. He was the oldest brother. He was a basketball star, and he would,
Was he supposed to be a senior in high school or was he already in college?
I think the first year I think he was a senior in college because I just watched like a breakdown of Chuck and Mr. Cunningham's talking to him, and he's like, he says something about his grades, and Marion said, "Now Chuck's doing a lot better now," and he said, "Well, he should be because he's taking the same classes he took last year, aren't you, Chuck?" So,
Uh,
but Chuck's a basketball star in college at some point, I guess the second season, and
yeah, that was an easy way to write him off.
yeah, and they did. And folks, if you don't know this, there's actual in Hollywood, there's a thing called the Chuck Cunningham syndrome, which is where if you have a character on TV that starts out being a, you know, an important part of this group, a notable part of the cast, and then they like, well, just disappear, and they're written in forever as if they never existed. That's called the Chuck Cunningham thing because they had 3 kids, as I mentioned, and then at some point Chuck leaves and he never comes back. And then by the time you're like fourth or fifth season, when they talk to people, they just say, "Yeah, we have our 2 kids, Richie and Joni." So they
Yeah,
don't
he's
even
never even
mention.
mentioned.
So he doesn't exist anymore. Ironically, he was played by 3 different actors.
Was it? Oh, really? There were three actors. I thought there were only two different actors. Okay.
Well, the first actor played him in the pilot,
Oh, the pilot. Okay.
and
Right.
then they
Right.
had the ginger that most people probably think of when if they think of him at all.
That's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, and he was always bouncing the basketball and driving Mr. C crazy. And then after he left, they just for a few episodes they had another guy. I don't even know why they didn't just let the other guy do the last couple episodes or whatever. But yeah, 3 guys played this one character that was basically in 1.5 seasons who disappeared and then was written off like they never existed. Kind of wild.
There's like an urban legend, or however you want to call it, Hollywood legend, that there's a scene where at the end, the last episode, they're sitting at the table, and then Mr. Cunningham looks up and he goes, "Hey, where's Chuck? Or what happened to Chuck?" Like he says it.
Yeah, I think there is. I think there actually is a.
I don't
It
think
was
it's
like a
real though.
blooper or something that they had. I do because I've actually seen that where he just kind of
Oh,
mentions that.
you've seen the clip? Yeah.
Yeah, so I have seen that. So you're right. I'd forgotten all about that. That's pretty funny. So Chuck's gone. So the mainstays of the show are, of course, Arthur Fonzarelli, the Fonz, and Richie. So they're the two main leads, and then you have the parents and you have his sister, but you also have Richie's two best friends, Ralph Mouth, that's his name, and Potsy Weber, also his name. Potsy is kind of the nerd and like kind of softer dude, I guess.
Yeah.
And
He's more the naive one.
yeah, he's not stupid. He's just kind of naive. And then you have Ralph Mouth, who wants to be a stand-up comedian, but he's more of a waka 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 kind of comedian, like you would have
Yeah.
like a Sid Caesar or something back in the 50s. That was his sensibility. He was always saying kind of funny stuff at the wrong
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I could definitely see he would have been in the Catskills or the Borscht Belt
Yeah, right.
back in the day.
Yeah. And so
Uh,
that's what he wanted to do. And so those were the guys that were with him, and they were kind of foils, if you will. So, for example, there's an episode where these two greasers, are going to start a fight with Richie, and they were going to start a fight with Richie, and then the Fonz scared him off, and then they come back to find him, and Richie's like, I want to take care of this myself, Fonz. He's like, I know I can do this. I've seen the Fonz do it. I know I can do it. So he stands up, he pops his collar, and he's kind of talking through his teeth like this, and he says, I'm going to turn around, and when I turn back around, you guys better be gone. And then Potsy and Ralph Mouth take off running to get away. They're so scared of what he was saying. But the two
uh,
greasers didn't leave. I think
Once again, Richie's face was a hamburger helper.
right. He told Fonzie, stay out of this, Fonz. I want to do it myself. And next thing you know, they're holding Richie's arms behind his back as they're just beating their fist into his gut as he shits his pants.
I was thinking right here is where you'd have the Morgan Freeman voiceover. I would like to tell you that Red got away or whatever.
Yeah.
I'd like to tell you that.
I'd like to say Sunday, Monday, crappy days. Oh man, good Lord. But yeah, so it
So of
was
course it conveniently works out.
yes, and it always does. It always works out. And it's a family friendly and a good feeling kind of show. Now the Fonz, he one of the things that is most memorable about him is that he was probably the first TV wizard. And they never cover why or anything, but he could, hit jukeboxes and it would play his favorite song. He could hit a drink machine. He's standing next to Richie, hits a drink machine, and two drinks come out. And then another one, he could snap his fingers, and the chicks would, six of them would show up, and he'd be like, "Hey, I'll play with you girls later," and you'll pick one of them, and
Yeah.
they couldn't resist him.
Yeah,
Even
the implications of what's going on in
yeah,
that
we'll
above
hit
garage apartment.
we'll hit those later. But another one he does is he gets sometimes he accidentally uses that power. So like he'll get mad and he hits the jukebox and it plays his songs. So he gets frustrated and have to hit it again to turn it off. And then in one he gets mad and he hits the side of a building and all the lights go off in the building. And then Richie's like, "Wait, what? Fonz, you just turned all the lights off." And then he hits it and they all come back on. And whenever anybody asked him, you know, how do you do that? How do you do that trick? And he's like, it's not a trick, it's a gift. And that's the only thing they ever cover with it.
Wow.
It's yeah,
Well, yeah, he didn't do any of that stuff in the first two seasons because once again, those were much more grounded. And then just over time, it gets to another thing in TV known as Flanderization. Have you heard
yeah,
of that term?
uh-uh.
Well, basically, you have characters; they have some nuance about them, but then you start noticing certain ticks about them, and as the season's going, those little ticks get exaggerated more and more.
Mm,
So what may have been like a one-off, and then he does a couple more, and then it gets so exaggerated towards the end that that's the only thing you think of.
right. That makes sense. So
And
yeah,
so
he would have.
it's named after Ned Flanders, who was a broader character, and then they just narrowed him down more and more to like to the point where he just says, Ned
Dokily
the God,
dokily.
Ned the God.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, what?
Yeah, that makes sense because in the early episodes, you would occasionally see Fonzie, hit a jukebox and it would play. It wasn't like every episode, but I guess it's like this. There's a thing that Ric Flair, woo, besides that he does that he used to do is if somebody would beat him up or whatever, and he'd kind of fend them off, he'd walk like 3 steps away and then just plant face first down to the ground. It's called the Flair flop, and
Oh, okay.
it's like obviously that would never really happen in real life, but he said that he did it once and it got a pop, and so later he did it again, it got another pop, so then it became something like you just mentioned, where you expected him to do it, and even though it kind of broke the illusion of, hey, is this real or not? You knew obviously it wasn't. It was just expected. So that's kind of like the Fonz. You expected every episode for him to snap and have girls come to him. You expect him to hit something and the record play or the lights go off or the door unshut or whatever. Fonz, those early episodes were definitely different in tone as well. Like you said, they're little snippets. There was one that I saw where Ralph Mouth Fonz comes into his office. Okay, if you don't know, the office is the bathroom at the diner in which they hang out. Arnold's.
Yes, Arnold's.
Played brilliantly by Pat Morita, who is Mr. Miyagi for anybody who doesn't know who Pat Morita is. And he's not he's American, but he always played the Japanese guy like this. He's a comedian. Even so that's what he would do, and that was part of the fun. So they walk in, Fonz walks into his office, the bathroom, where he would tell people, hey, Cunningham, in my office. And they'd walk into the bathroom and have a talk. We walked in there, and Ralph Mouth and Potsy are in there, and they've taken a bra that they found from somebody, and they've strapped it around a radiator, and they're trying to practice unhooking the woman's bra. So, like, oh, if we get lucky on a date, I'll know how to do this. I mean, which is pretty risque, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
they can't do it, so they kind of just run off. He's like, "Get out of here," and they leave. Fonzie walks over to it and he looks at his fingers on his left hand. He blows them, and he reaches down, and in 2 seconds, with one hand, he undoes the bra, and it falls off, and he goes over to the mirror, pulls out his switchblade comb. So and there comes the comb, and he go to comb his hair. That's when he opens his arms, like, hey, like, hey, there's no
Yeah.
way I can improve perfection.
That's right. Yeah, he wouldn't even touch his hair.
No, Fonzie had some fears that popped up throughout the show as well. One was liver. Do you remember that episode?
No.
Yeah, the Fonz was he hated liver. He was actually afraid of it for some reason, and he refused to. He didn't want to see it. He wasn't going to eat it, and so eventually, to face his fears, he had to eat the liver, but he refused to sit down while he ate it because he thought, well, if I'm standing up, it'll go through me faster, and it won't be in my body. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
He also had a problem saying he was sorry, so he'd be like,
Yeah.
"Oh,
He also he couldn't say he was wrong. I
right, wrong,
remember
yeah, it was
that.
it,
Yeah.
yeah." But Fonzie, you just hit a 3-year-old on your motorcycle. He's lying dead in the street. What do you have to say for yourself? There's no time for shenanigans. So to break it down, basically the kind of show that this was, the lessons that they taught, and that was what I think as a kid I liked about it. I mean, you could look at it like it was kind of heavy-handed, uh, but it was, for example, the one I mentioned before, where Richie is going to fight these two hoodlums. And Fonzie had scared him off before, and he doesn't want to be saved by Fonzie anymore. And so, he keeps, he tries to do the tough voice, and that the guy's like, yeah, whatever. And so he's gonna have to fight him, and he's like, Fonzie, can't you give me any advice? And he's like, yeah, take off. He's like, how come I'm doing the voice? How come it's not working? And he goes, well, I forgot to mention one little detail, Red. You have to have a reputation of having been in a fight before. And he's like, that's kind of a big thing to leave out, Fonzie. You son of a bitch. No, he left that part out. And he says,
after he comes back in straggling, missing a couple of teeth. Crying, Fonz, you could have helped me.
Appreciate it, pulling his pants back up. So he tells him, he's like, you got any more advice? He's like, yeah. When he goes to take his jacket off, hit him as hard as you can. That's when you get a punch in. And he's like, oh, will I win the fight? He goes, oh, no, he's going to kill you. But at least you'll have gotten one good punch in. So Richie, steps up to the guy and he takes his jacket off. Then the guy goes to take his jacket off, and Richie grabs the guy's arm. You're right, because he told Fonzie, he goes, but that's not fair. And he goes, yeah, well, he's taller than you. That's not fair either. It's a fight. It's what you do. And so when the guy goes to take his jacket off, Richie grabs his sleeve and pulls to try to like hip toss him over, like a judo toss.
Oh, is that just throws the jacket over?
It just pulls the jacket over. And then the guy's like, hey, what are you doing? And he's like, yeah, well, this time it was your jacket. Next time it'll be you. And he starts hitting the jacket, and then he starts going crazy and runs over to the guy's buddy and bows up on him. And then he runs up and jumps up on the counter or whatever. And he starts yelling, I'll take everybody on. I don't care. And, Arnold comes out and he's like, what are you doing? Nobody fighting my restaurant. And the hoodlum's like, hey, it wasn't me. He just went crazy. Get out of here. And he takes off running. Fonzie's laughing. Actually, I think Henry Winkler is laughing, because by the looks of it, it looks like he's laughing like for real. But he tells Richie, he's like, hey, that was great. You really pulled it off. And he's like, well, I feel like a fraud. He's like, why? He's like, well, I was scared the whole time. I didn't feel like a hero. And he goes, hey, that's when you are a hero. That's when when you're afraid and you still do it. Everybody gets afraid. You just can't go around life acting like it all the time. And he's like, oh, that's okay. That's good advice. Well, what about you, Fonz? You're never afraid. And he goes, yeah, that's why I'm the Fonz. And so that's that's the hook, right? Fonzie's never afraid, which makes him certifiably insane, actually, because if he has no fear, if Fonzie, I dare you to stick your dick in that meat grinder, I'm not afraid. Yeah.
He just snaps and the grinder blades just, snap off.
Yeah, because he's just that hard. He's the Fonz.
Yeah.
He's like, they call him Tungsten Pecker. That's his nickname.
The shrapnel is flying everywhere and embedding in people's faces. Hey.
Oh, God. He's just combing his hair while it's all happening. So that's
just imagine people are sliding around in like the blood on the floor. Like out of Kill Bill.
Oh, God. Oh, man, that's funny. Woof. Anyway, if old Ralph Mouth could come up with jokes like that, he'd have been what was that guy's name? Benny who was
been Lenny Bruce.
Lenny Bruce, yeah. He'd have been Lenny Bruce back in the day. Yeah. But so that was the kind of things that they had. They had life lessons, but there were things too that he was, the Fonz was, the Fonz had his issues. I mean, yeah, he could snap his finger and 6 women would, teenage women would come over to him and stuff. And he started out, he had his own garage, right? He was a mechanic.
Actually, originally he was just a mechanic at the garage. He later bought that.
Oh yeah, right. And
so what I always thought of is, okay, I think he was a high school dropout.
Right.
So he was a mechanic. He was like so many years older than everybody else.
Yeah.
But that's what he was. He's this cool guy, but at the same time, he's a mechanic. That's what
Yeah,
he
he
did.
had there was ironically, I was telling my daughter that we were going to be doing this, and she'd never heard of Happy Days, but she'd heard of the Fonz, I'm sure through me. But I told her, I said, yeah, you learned lessons like, for example, Fonzie, he dropped out of high school, but later he went back and got his GED with the encouragement of the Cunninghams. So, it was kind of like, hey, education is important, which is
Mhm.
true. But, in 1957, if you were a mechanic and you had your own mechanic shop, you didn't need an education. If obviously Fonzie was smart, he was a mechanic, right? So he could work on anything.
Then that gets into the later years where he eventually became a teacher.
Yeah. And he grew a beard.
Yeah, and he grew, yes, and I was going to bring that up. So his character, even though it got kind of exaggerated, then they started fleshing out the character towards the last few seasons.
Right. It
Wasn't he even
really
getting
became the
married?
Fonzie show then.
Yeah, that almost could have been a spinoff. Oh wait, that show was kind of this spinoff.
Yeah, because I didn't know anybody who was watching it at that point. Now that gets to, of course, the lasting legacy that everybody knows from Happy Days, even if they've never heard of Happy Days, is of course jumping the shark. You can't have a
Yes.
discussion about Happy Days without talking about what is, like I said, the lasting aspect of this show. Even when everybody's forgotten who the Fonz is or that Happy Days or even what TV is, they'll still be using the phrase jump the shark. And you want to tell the audience of three what what
Yes.
jumping the shark was?
Okay. For our edification, everyone's edification here, all three of us. It's basically in the late 70s, they decided to have an episode of Happy Days where they're on the West Coast, they're at the beach somehow, some way.
Richie wanted to be a he wanted to write for Hollywood, so they went out to California so he had a job interview, I believe. That's
Oh,
why they were
okay.
there.
Yes. And in the process of all that, somehow the Fonz is somehow coerced into he's on water skis because that was a big thing.
Well, he was
In the
challenged
70s. He
by
was the
this guy.
challenge. But I mean, the point is, like, if that had not been a thing at the time, if that had not been popular, could any of this have happened?
No.
No, they were just obviously riding on a very popular, a fad, a trend with water skiing. Not that it's, no one does it now, but I'm just saying it was huge at that time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it was a
so
big deal.
they had to have this episode, and they had to do something greater than the time he jumped
The
on this
chicken coops.
motorcycle.
Yeah. He
They had to
busted
do
his leg
something
up.
better than that, yes,
Yeah.
than he did in the early episodes when he was just jumping things with his motorcycle. They're like, how do we make that any better?
Which is of
And of course,
course
Jaws
inspired by
was
that was
popular.
inspired by uh Evil Knievel. So,
Yes, yep. So Evil Knievel was popular. Jaws had been popular, so you had to have some dangerous shark element in a lot
yep.
of shows. And so, yes, so by that time, the show got to the point where they were actually showing the Fonz in his leather jacket,
Yep.
water skiing, going
Yeah.
over a ramp, over a shark tank. And that
Yes.
is jumping the shark. And that is anytime a show or any premise or basically anything, once there's a line where it was credible and then it did something that's ridiculous and you can never come back from that. It's just forever changed. There's no,
Yeah, it's it's the beginning of the end, or it is the end. If it's a rapid end almost. Now Henry Winkler has rightfully so. He's defended this. He's pointed out that the show was still the number one show in their time slot for like 3 more years after this. But I think that's because people can be sheeple, and they're you know everybody watched it, so you just watched it even if it wasn't all that good. You'd put it on, I guess.
well, I want to also say that the audience was changing.
True.
You're getting, younger and younger kids watching the show by the late 70s.
Yep.
That was a big factor, I think.
Yeah, I remember being in fifth and sixth grade and watching, Fonzie was still super cool. People say, hey, people still do that. And then by the time I got in, but certainly by the time I was in the eighth grade, nobody was talking about the Fonz. We were talking about Knight Rider and Magnum PI and
Exactly. We had moved up to the
18.
next. We were,
Yeah,
yep, watching these supposed action shows.
right. And so it changed. The TV changed, the audience changed, all that. So nothing lasts forever. And that was an example of it. But that one specific moment was a time when people were like, all right, this is stupid. Because frankly, the Fonz, they all went out there, which in itself is stupid. I mean, Ralph
Yeah.
Mouth,
How
all
does
of them.
every single character they all decide to go that week while
Right.
Richie's getting an interview?
They're from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they're all going to fly out there to, which God knows how much money that must have cost back in the day. So anyway, I mean, it's not cheap now, so you can only imagine. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, they go out there, and then so Fonzie's super cool, and he's hanging out at the beach, and he's basically a stereotype of himself at this point, and so he's wearing his leather jacket on the beach in the sun. It's got to be 400 degrees, and basically this skier had a girlfriend who Fonzie like snaps his finger or whatever, and she comes drops her top and comes over. I
Yeah.
guess they might have missed that part, but she she was into the
It
Fonz
was
and got
implied.
it was implied. That's right.
Yeah.
And they come out from underneath the the pier, and Fonzie's like pulling his pants up. So anyway, it was a different time, folks, for
Yeah.
family entertainment. And so anyway, the guy was mad and he challenged Fonzie. He didn't want to fight him because he was afraid, I guess. But he told him, "Hey, if you've got the guts, why don't you jump over that shark that's in that net, this big netting they had there? For some reason, they
Because
were
we don't
keeping the
care about the
shark.
welfare of animals.
It's like 50 feet off the beach, and they're
Yeah.
keeping this shark in this net. So
Yeah.
anyway,
It's
um,
starving.
so he does it. And folks, if you must do yourself the favor of going back and watching this scene on YouTube because it is so drawn out. It's
Is it
hard to fathom.
the super slow mo of him jumping over the shark?
Well, not only that,
A
but you
couple of the
see,
camera angles.
there's a lead up where he's on the skis and he's behind it, and it cuts to the pier where Richie and all of them say, oh no, he's gonna do it. And it cuts back to the Fonz from a different angle. He's lining it up and it goes back. So it's going back and forth from the family and stuff, and the guy that bet him and whatever. And then he's coming, and here he goes, getting ready to hit his skis are on the ramp, and then commercial. And then it comes back from commercial, and it's like 4 seconds before that, where he's still in slow motion, getting ready to go over the ramp.
Oh my God.
And he does. And when he's in the air, I'm not kidding you, it's like 15 seconds of him or whatever through the air, as if, I mean, like, what was the suspense? I mean, do we
Yeah.
do we think Fonzie is gonna like miss and fall in the shark tank and get
I know.
ripped?
I mean, there's
They have the
exactly
same like
there are no stakes in this at all.
with Flint. It's like in Jaws with Flint when he's sliding down the boat into the giant shark's chomping
No, yeah.
teeth. No, we didn't expect that.
There's only like there's one or two people out there, and it's like somebody's octogenarian great grandmother. She doesn't even think it's a show. She thinks it's just a movie on. Is that boy gonna get hurt?
they, they cut to a different camera, and the shark's behind the Fonz going at it, and Fonz is
Yeah.
snaps his
Hey, that was my
finger.
spleen.
I knew that you things had hooks on the barbs on the end of your penis, so I couldn't get away. Hey.
Oh my
So, folks, th-
God.
this is this is
Yeah.
where it's heading. So here's this. We're just going to move on.
We didn't really even do a good job of talking about the good parts of the show, but let's just go back for just 30 seconds and recap that.
Yeah.
So there were some good issues that were brought up in those
Yep.
early seasons.
Mm-hmm.
It was really a slice of life. It was more like, okay, what is it like for somebody of that age going to school and all that, whatever you would say travails of that time period, and a character who's kind of mysterious, the Fonz. He slowly is brought into the fold and becomes friends with these young guys. Then after that, it just becomes like a sitcom. It's like Three's Company.
Right. Formulaic. I mean,
I mean,
not
it was
every,
still very enjoyable. I mean, you
yeah.
still love the show. It just was a different show. It's
Yeah,
like
it,
kind of
it was
like
like on for like 9 years, right? So I mean, and
yeah, it
of
was on
those
for a
9 years,
decade.
yeah. So of those 10 years, it was number one in its time slot for most of them, and then it had spinoffs. So you had like you mentioned, Laverne and Shirley, which was a popular show for quite a while, and had Lenny and Squiggy, which were phenomenal characters, and and they would bring people in every now and then, like they brought in Susie Quattro, who was one of the
National
first
musician.
rock, yeah, rock women basically, and she played
Yes.
Leather Tuscadero. She had her chest slap her pants or leather pants twice, and then point like she's got a gun, and that was kind of her I guess. It got some there was some silly things that eventually it had. You had Chachi, which most people have heard of. Joni and Chachi. Joni was the sister and Chachi was Fonzie's cousin, and they became a, will they, won't they?
Yeah, they did that for several years, and then eventually it was
Eventually, they
definitely
fell in
they
love.
were. Yeah.
Yeah, they were a thing, and then they had their own show, which was beyond lame. That was kind of like every episode they were trying to find a way to get up on stage and sing. There was some quirky things about the show that we loved that were cool. Like, for example, I mentioned the Fonz. He had his office, which was the bathroom, and they'd go in and they'd have this little meeting, and if they walked in and somebody was in the bathroom, Fonz would bang on the door, and whoever was in the bathroom would get up and leave. Whether they'd wipe or not, I have no idea, but they'd leave. And
And so leaving there's a trail of diarrhea.
it's just you never hear them flush. They just leave a
Yeah.
log and the fucking thing stinking up. Anyway, and they'd have their meetings there or whatever. And eventually, Pat Morita left Arnold, a little Asian guy, and he sold it to Al Delvecchio. And Al was this Italian dude with this really big nose, and it was named Arnold's for a long, long time, even though Al owned it. And then I can't remember how, but at some point they changed the name to Owls. Now, was that when Chachi burned it down?
I can't remember, but now, spoiler alert, yeah, now they all know Chachi burned it down.
Yes. Um,
All
I
right,
think
but yeah.
I think it
So yeah,
was,
Chachi was brought in. He was kind of a dopey, like kind of silly character in a way, but also just the enthusiasm of a teenager.
yeah. He was like,
And
the cute,
somewhere he screwed up, like any kid will do, and burn down a diner. I mean,
right? Yeah. And they had things like
he felt
Joni
terrible about it.
smoked. Remember Joni smoking? And she
Oh, that's right. Yes.
yeah, so she got caught smoking, and that was a big deal, even though, in 1957, 233% of people smoked.
Yeah.
So,
But like in the late '70s, they said, "Oh, we probably shouldn't be promoting that."
yeah,
Is when that started, and
yeah,
so retroactively, the world is retconned of like it's what are you doing smoking
right,
instead of you're 15. It's like, well, you're gonna be a junior next year. You may as well start smoking.
right. I mean, Eddie Van Halen said that when he was like 8 years old or something, he fell off his bike and busted his face, and he was crying and upset, and his dad was like, here's a shot of liquor and a cigarette, it'll calm you down. So that's how that all started. But
Oh wow,
different world,
yeah.
but they wanted to teach lessons. It was a very positive and upbeat show, and nothing too terrible ever happens. I mean, I guess they occasionally had a very emotional moment, like when Fonzie's dad shows up. Do you remember that one?
Oh my God, I forgot about it. But now, yes, thinking about that, that was where, well, obviously, Fonz wasn't happy to see him.
Right. His dad was, well, he didn't know it was his dad at first. This merchant marine basically shows up at his door and is like, "Hey, are you Arthur Fonzarelli? Yeah. Hey, I've got a present from your dad." And Fonzie's like, "Hey, well, you can take this back to him and tell him I don't need nothing from him." And it's obvious to we the viewer that this is his dad, right? Fonzie had picked up on it. And he's like, "Well, I'm not, I don't need anything from him." And he's like, "Well, I know your dad, and he was a good guy, and I'm sure whatever the reason is, he must have had his reasons. But anyway, Merry Christmas, like Merry Christmas to you too." And he leaves. And then later, when they're together when Fonz is together with the Cunninghams, and he's told them that he got this letter from his dad, he finds out by reading. He starts reading it, and it says, "I'm the one who dropped it off. I'm sorry. If
Oh,
you're reading this and I'm not there, I didn't have the guts to stay." And he says, as Fonzie stops reading it, he's like, I don't need, I don't know why he left. I know it was my fault." And they're like, "You were 3 years old, Fonzie. It wasn't your fault." Yeah, it was, so he was taking the blame for it. And he wouldn't read anymore. So Richie read it. And basically it said, "You're I was a merchant marine, and I was a rambling man. I couldn't stay in one place at another, at any time for any length of time. I met your mom, and she was great, but I had to leave. Sorry." And Mrs. Cunningham's like, "Oh, see, Arthur, that was, he didn't mean anything by it." But Howard Cunningham, the dad, was like, "No, that's not right. He's not a man. There's always something
hmm.
to, every man goes through a time when they want to take off and join the merchant marines or whatever, but they have responsibilities." And that's, he was right. That was the message of it.
Mhm.
And then but then Fonzie cheers and hops up, and they're like, "Whoa, okay, why are you happy?" He's like, "Well, I always thought it was me, but it turns out it's him." So he was, that was
Okay.
the happy message. So, there was, but it was, you could cry watching it when you were a kid. Who could
Yeah,
do this to the
there's
Fonz?
yeah, no. Well, very touching moments, I should say. And then we
Mork for
have
Mork.
the
Robin
yeah.
Williams, he came from this. This was his first big break on
Oh,
television.
well, I was going to go into like some more of the spin-offs. So yes, that's exactly where we should go next.
All right. You
Mork
want
and
to handle
Mindy.
that one?
Yeah, yeah, Mork and Mindy. Um, well, Mork was introduced in a single episode of Happy Days. It was late '70s, and I can't remember how exactly happens, but he's basically going to be fighting the Fonz, and
Right.
then later somehow from that, I guess they get so much feedback, so much positive feedback from this character Mork. But since he's an alien from the planet Orc, you can't just have him show up every week. What do we do? So I guess at that point they must have decided we'll make a show around him. Only we can't have it from that time period. We'll just make it contemporary Boulder, Colorado, 1977, 78. And then they ever mention about, hey, what about that time you went to the 50s? Did they ever talk about that on the regular show?
Not that I know of. I wouldn't be surprised if they slipped that in, with a little, maybe he mentioned something about, "I used to know a guy who wore a jacket like that," or something, so,
Yeah, maybe.
but it wasn't
But that was like probably the most, other than Laverne and Shirley, those were actually both very successful spinoffs in their own
right.
right.
Right. And of
I
course,
can't say
Mork,
Mork and Minnie. I don't know if that was actually more popular than Laverne and Shirley, but maybe
Robin
the
Williams
demographic
certainly
skewed
was.
a little bit. Yeah, I think that.
Yeah,
But I
so
was.
Laverne and Shirley probably was a more popular show, or certainly lasted longer. And but Mork for Mork was sort of out there a bit, so they weren't really the same audience necessarily. But obviously, Robin Williams, became one of the greatest comedians of his generation. So he was around for a long time, won an Oscar even. Matter of fact, maybe two, at least one. But so to sum up the good part of this, basically, this was a great sitcom that lasted a long time. It was set in the 50s perpetually, and had great characters, in particular the Fonz, and it was very positive and it was very upbeat. And as Maddie and I and many Gen Xers were growing up, it was like, wow, this is a great show, and I love the Fonz. I love that all the chicks like him. I love that he rides his motorcycle. I love this relationship he has with Richie, who's a nerd. So any nerd could be hopeful that they had their Fonz. It was cool. It was great.
Yeah.
Um, but as Matty Man mentioned or implied earlier, uh, once we got older and in college and became more cynical of, well, basically we started one night talking about everything we just talked about in this podcast, about how great this show was, how cool the Fonz was, how amazing it was, what the impact it had on us, and how our generation, which at that point was being referred to as Generation X, were owed a debt. Young men owed a debt to of gratitude to the Fonz, and then we started kind of going on a rant about the implications of what if this were a real situation, what would it really be like? And
Yes. I
it's
think it would go a little something like this.
like this. Fonzie is a creeper.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know if they mention how old he is, but I think he's like supposed to be. I mean, he's got to be 30, right?
I don't think they're saying he's 30 on the show. He looked like he was about 30.
Yeah, I think Henry Winkler was definitely in his late 20s when he was making this. But this show was on for 10 years.
Yeah.
But
So let's just say if he's supposed to be a 26 or 27-year-old hanging out with, high school students.
yeah, like juniors.
Yeah, so he's basically a good 10 years on everyone else.
Yeah, he's
And
at this hangout
yes,
where
he's
all
at this
these high school
hangout.
girls are at. He
He
snaps
snaps
his
his
fingers.
fingers. All these girls go over to him. And when I say girls, I mean minors.
Yes, and he says girls and minors, he means like six or seven
Underage.
of them at a
Yeah.
time. And he would just pick whichever one, sometimes two. He had the I can't remember what their names were, but it was the twins. He always mentioned, I have a date with the
Oh yeah,
twins.
he would go on a date with twins. Like, what is this implying?
And
I wonder.
he wasn't taking them to church, folks. He was the Fonz, and it was highly implied that these women would do anything for him. So he's
The
banging
difference is he can, yeah, he
two
can snap his
sisters.
fingers. Yeah, at his
He's
apartment.
Yeah, he's having a threesome with two sisters in his apartment that he rents above the Cunninghams
Yes.
in 1957.
Yeah.
And
No, none of these girls' dad is going to show up and like want to, take Mr. Cunningham outside and drag him behind his car.
right. He'll just tie a chain to his feet and just drag him for letting this hoodlum. He thinks he's in on it. Uh,
Right.
and you have to wonder, did sometimes Howard Cunningham, late at night, did he kind of wait till Marion was asleep and he kind of just listen quietly to hear if he could, see if he could hear anything coming from upstairs, find moans and stuff. Mr.
Yeah.
you know,
He goes out to the garage, because he thought he heard like something like maybe there's an animal loose in
yeah.
the garage, and all he can hear is that.
Yeah, he's got a hole through one of, a little peephole through one of the things. He's looking down at Fonzie with these two identical twins. And in one way, he's disgusted because he's like, this conservative. Well, they never mentioned church, but just they're conservative Christians, basically, they're Midwest people in the 1950s, and he had to be like, oh God, oh Fonzie, you're living my life. Oh yeah, do that to her. Come on, Mister. See, Joni gets out of bed, and Joni. He's impressionable Joni, who everybody looks up to the Fonz here. He even has the approval of Mrs. C, who he is, the lonely housewife that lives underneath. He is absolutely banging her occasionally. Let's face the
Yeah.
facts here.
Yeah. Yep.
She's
She's calling him Arthur, then she's winking at him.
Yeah, yeah. At one point, he'll come down to get his meal after Mister C's left to go to work, and Fonz is getting ready to leave, and he goes and she hands him the brown paper bag, and she's wearing just an apron.
Yeah.
Here, Arthur.
Or
Hey,
I
Arthur,
also imagine,
can I see your Excalibur?
oh,
Oh God,
yes.
terrible.
yeah, but and then I was imagining like at some point she's standing in the kitchen with the those shutters open, and Mr. Cunningham's look at the table. He's just looking down, reading a paper, and she's just like mouthing over to the Fonz, "I hate him so much. One day we'll be together."
Do you know where to hide a body?
Yeah.
He's kind of fat. We need a lot of room.
What was that there? Oh,
Nothing,
nothing.
nothing, Howard, you son of a bitch.
Yeah, she's doing like a wank off gesture behind him.
I mean, Fonz, he had to have had gonorrhea and syphilis. I mean, and he's spreading it like the plague throughout little old Minneapolis, not Minneapolis,
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee. That's where it was set. Yeah. So this blue collar town with all these Midwest girls, and Fonzie's got his pick of the litter, and he's
And,
abusing
and
it.
yeah, and the thing is, and he's this, Italian mechanic, greaser, leather, biker. Oh
Right.
yeah, yeah. These guys are going to tolerate that.
Right. Yeah. There were a lot of Italians in the show, actually, if you think about it. I mean, think about it. You had the Tuscaderos, you had Jenny Piccolo, which
Right.
was Joni's best friend. Um, Al Del Vecchio. Yeah, so you had a lot. I guess it
Yeah.
was an invasion, basically, is why they didn't.
Yeah. There must have been a very large Italian community, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just imagining like you know, the Lutherans or the Protestants or whoever these, looking
Right, and
over
the
it like,
Catholics
what's this
come into
guy?
town.
Yeah, exactly. That era. Yes.
Yeah,
And so you think of like maybe a group of them, like take Fonzie out of his bedroom, after they because he's had his way with all their daughters.
yeah, they would not put up with it, no doubt.
Yeah, yeah, in real life. I'm just
And the
saying.
the, the cop, Officer Cook, who was like the he was this cop that came around
Oh,
and
he
would
was
give.
always out for him. Yeah.
Yeah, he was out for Fonzie, so he wouldn't. There wouldn't be any problem with him turning a blind eye to like six or seven fathers pulling, the Fonz out of off his motorcycle and just beating the hell out of him, lynch him up in the front yard.
Yeah.
Hey, what are you people doing? Well, officer, this is the man who has had sex with 43 of our daughters. He's knocked multiple of them up and he's left them. All he does is snap. He's got some kind of hose, black magic. He's a wizard. We gotta kill him. Okay, I'll turn a blind eye. It's how
Yeah, exactly. All right, Arthur Fonzarelli, you're gonna
yeah,
get what's coming to you.
yeah, that's how he talked. So this is the kind of stuff that Matty Man and I were talking about one magical night at VCU, talking about how, what a great inspiration and how much we loved Happy Days and the Fonz.
And I will say there was no alcohol involved in this,
Uh,
none whatsoever.
why would there be? We
Yeah,
you know, they don't allow that in when we were going to church every
yeah,
single night. And
yeah.
so we were just, being honest about how great it was. And then we started to kind of realize some of the dark implications of what this actually meant. And as we just said, you know, he was a womanizer and he was banging all these young chicks. I mean, when I say young, I mean like jailbait and
Yes.
and so forth. And you're hanging out with all these younger.
I highly doubt the age of consent was 15 or 16 in Milwaukee in 1956.
I highly doubt it. And so we thought, what would it really be like? Maddie brought up the fact that, the Fonz's bathroom, the bathroom was the Fonz's office, basically. And uh, we mentioned how Chachi accidentally, I can't even remember how it happened, but he accidentally burned down uh, Arnold's. And so it was rebuilt. And when it was rebuilt, Al Dalvecchio, who ran it and changed it from
Mhm.
Arnold's to Al's, uh, asked Fonzie to be a partner, right?
Yeah, that's right. He was a part owner of the diner.
Yep. And so he's this grease monkey that we've never seen work at all in his job outside of like the first season when he was a bit character, somehow has the cash to go in on what is the riskiest business prospects.
No
And
man.
you know, like 80% of all restaurants fail, and he's going to sink his hard-earned, money. Probably the only money he would have had for retirement and stuff. So he took this chance. But anyway,
And let's not forget, at some point, he's married with a stepkid.
yeah, but not at this point, right? He's not at this point. He's still like the single guy Fonz. Uh,
Okay, single guy Fonz, but
yes.
he
So
may have been a teacher at some point at the time this happened.
I think the last he was part owner while that happened, but I think when it
Yeah,
initially happened, he wasn't a teacher or anything yet. He was still the
he was
Fonz.
still the Fonz
Yeah.
doing Fonz things.
Yes, doing Fonz things. So as a touching memorial to the Fonz and how everybody knew the bathroom was his office, when they built the office, they actually put a desk in it
Yes,
in the
it
toilet.
actually became his office. Literally and figuratively, that was his office.
That was his office. So when he told everybody, they're going to have a private huddle in my office instead of in the bathroom, it was his.
Yeah.
It was his bathroom was his office.
Like, what if he had to, fire someone? I hadn't thought of that.
I didn't
We
either.
we we went, in our 20s, we went like the dark sexual way, but at the same time, like, yeah, that would be really awkward.
Right. In our 50s, we're like, it's, from a
I mean,
business
like he has to,
standpoint.
yeah, he has to call someone in and talk about their poor performance and how they need to step it up. Meanwhile, you're,
you,
hey, hold it down.
we really, we
I
really,
got a conference call going on here.
Miss
I got a
Johnson,
supplier.
we hired you 2 months ago, and we were very happy about that. But we've seen that you've missed a few days without a good reason, and it's not appropriate as your employer. We think that hey, I've got to take some time off. My father's got cancer, and I'm gonna.
let's, let's not forget, it is the men's room.
It is the men's
And
room.
he is an owner, and he's going to have to talk to employees, both male and female. And sometimes he has to have a conference call. So, of course, someone's got bad diarrhea on that day. Oh, come on, man. I'm on the phone with Spokane. All right. This is
So
important distribution going on here.
it devolved into, Fonzie, since he just basically can have any woman he wants, as many as he wants, he just has orgies where he's the only guy there, you know, and this has been going on for years and years and years. All these hot underage high school girls
He's
with their
gotten
little.
desensitized to that normie world.
Yeah, he doesn't even want to see another pencil skirt and tight fuzzy sweater. He's just like, he doesn't particularly want to go to pitch for the home team. So he's like, I don't know. He's doing his taxes one night, sitting at his desk, and so blink, and yeah, he'll just kind of reach over with grab his pencil and throw it 3 or 4 feet away from him, so it's kind of a little bit underneath the stall, so he has to lean over underneath the stall to get his pencil so he can kind of look up and see what's going on,
Yeah.
get a
Hey,
whiff.
don't sweat it. Don't sweat it.
Hey, sorry, man.
It's all good.
Unless, of course, if you have any questions for me, I could stay right here and talk to you. And then, you know, we had where he'd like accidentally trip and
Yeah.
kick
Kick open the
the
door, kick
kick
open the stall, and just go mouth down.
his mouse. Like, uh-oh, as he falls into the guy's lap, gives him a blumpkin. And
Like he has no, he's just like, I don't care anymore. I've done everything. I don't care.
who's going to
And
believe it? I'm the
yeah,
Fonz. Who's going to believe that I'm doing this?
but it was not just on that level. It was just, we imagined how he had a drawer full of pubic hair.
Right? He'd hear
And he
somebody.
just smears it all over him, while he's
he,
finishing himself off.
he waits till the guy's done peeing,
Yeah.
and he's over with that little ching, ching, he's doing his numbers, and the guy leaves. He's kind of looking over out of the corner of his eye, and he sees the guy leave, and then he goes over and sees the few pubes
Yeah.
on the.
Collects them in his box,
And he just
his
brushes it
collection.
off
Yeah.
into his hand, and then comes and puts it in his bottom drawer.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you say, he adds to his collection.
My God, he puts it in his
Yeah.
bottom
I
drawer
know.
and looks at like.
I'm gonna. I've got a names for you.
When
But
nobody's there.
anyway, a
He just,
podcaster is he's incapacitated, folks.
yeah, oh my God. And he just goes and locks the door and takes off his shirt and rubs them all over himself. And
Yeah.
so by the end of the conversation, we had turned the Fonz from the most one of the most influential men of our lives into this complete perverse weirdo, and what all
Yes.
of this would have meant in reality, and it just didn't float.
No. I think it all started because of the fact that I was just thinking one day, like, "Well, how weird is that he actually had a desk in the men's room?" So I'm imagining him just doing regular, legitimate, just like business, like he's looking over invoices, and then all of a sudden you hear that little turd drop into the bowl. Doink. He looks over, hey,
Like,
that's how it started, and then we
yeah,
went the dark,
it got farther and farther into
sadomasochistic, whatever you want to call it.
twisted. He's like,
Yeah,
Fonzie likes to bring his motorcycle into his garage, and he fires it up and shuts the door down and sees how close he can get to passing out before he opens the door. It's just he can't even get off unless he's hurtling towards death. He's just he's done it all to this point.
that's
And
after he's also taken his scarf. Remember that red scarf he had
oh
when
yeah,
they
yeah.
and he's like, choking himself with that. You gotta have the autoerotic asphyxiation in there somewhere. Yeah,
This, it kind of pulls a David Carradine, and you know
yeah, he carried himself.
today in local news, local legend and friend to many, Arthur Gertrude Fonzarelli, was found dead today in his apartment, where he apparently had suffocated to death on his red scarf everyone knew. He was found hanging with his pants down and a smile on his face. We're sorry to say, folks. Film at 11.
And whatever the Jefferson High mascot was, or whatever their team name is, go Jefferson Tigers.
Yeah, right. That was Fonzie's last words. Nobody knew it. So we were just. I mean, it was probably we'd had a 12 pack each probably at this point, and
Yeah,
it was like 4 in the morning, so we were already giddy, and
yeah,
we just saw what the gist of this whole thing would have been if you just followed the logical or probably
yeah. Yeah,
illogical
the
conclusion.
logical conclusion on any of these things. But yes, the fact that the man had a desk in the men's room, that kind of writes itself,
Yeah, and
honestly. So how don't blame us. You
right.
think the same thing.
Blame Gary Marshall. He's the guy who came up with
Yeah,
all of it. So
the perv.
yeah, that was the long con. That's what it was. It was the long con. He wanted to have that implication, but he couldn't do it in 1970s, 1980s uh, TV world. So he had to
Yes.
just imply it heavily that was what was going to be happening.
Well, coming out of that Andy Warhol scene in the late '60s, he always wanted to do those kinds of films. He was thwarted, damn it.
Right, but he's too famous and successful to drop down that low. I mean, we didn't even talk about like basically Spike. Spike Fonzarelli, who was the Fonz's nephew, who I guess was like 10 years old.
Oh wow, Spike. Yeah,
Yes.
that's definitely the era where like everybody had to have a kid
Yeah.
sidekick.
Luckily, they dumped this kid. He was in seasons 3 and 4, I believe. So but
Oh,
he
was he?
wasn't in
Oh, he
every
was the
episode.
precursor to Chachi then. He was the one where they're like, nah, nah, too too obnoxious,
Too
too
young, yeah. I
yeah,
think
too
they
young.
replaced him with Chachi,
Yeah,
or
that's what it
they
was.
might have
Yeah, you're
overlapped
right.
a little. But he
Yeah,
so Spike sucked. He was
yeah.
basically
But yeah, bring back to Spike. Yeah,
he was a little Fonz. So he had the
but he
little
was the Scrappy Doo of
yes,
yeah,
that's more like that's exactly what he was. He had the leather jacket, he had the glasses. Instead of having a motorcycle, he had an actual bicycle, and uh, he tried to be the Fonz. And at one point, when Joni's like 13 or 14 years old, he was constantly hitting on her, and it was, you know, I guess supposed to be cute because he's like this 10-year-old hitting on this 13 or 14-year-old because he wants to be the Fonz. He wants to be a sexual deviant like his cousin. And
yes,
but then so they got rid of him and they brought in Chachi, and Scott Baio played Chachi, and he was a real tiger beat and teen beat kind of
yeah.
guy,
He was definitely in that. Yeah, Scott Baio was the Leif Garrett. What Scott Cassidy
right? Yeah.
in that same
Sean
mold. Sean
Cassidy.
Cassidy,
Yeah.
thank you, Sean Cassidy. Yes,
Yeah, so he was like, good looking kid who was in his mid to late teens, and so they'd sell magazines of it with him on it, and Chachi was an okay character. He certainly wasn't Spike by any
yeah.
stretch of the imagination. So
Well, I think they were once they realized, okay, that young, it's too young. They figured, oh, we just ratchet up a few years, and then he's a teenager.
and they
We
but
can make him more relatable.
I think the problem was they tried to make him like mini Fonzie, but
Yeah,
that didn't work. So when they brought in Chachi, they never even went there. They just went that, he's like, kind of this cool kid from out of town, and that was his main character arc, was that he was a kind kid from out of town who was a little rough around the edges. He wasn't quite as threatening or anything as the Fonz was, but he was a good kid basically.
yeah.
But they didn't
He
try to
did
make
not
him
burn
Fonzie
down the
part two.
diner. He
Yes,
did
I don't
not
even
burn down the diner maliciously. It was a mistake. It
right,
was
it
an
was.
accident.
And he didn't tell anybody, and I think he outed himself, right? So he didn't. So part of that moral was, don't lie. If you do something, take responsibility for it, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, I think they really at that point knew that it was a younger audience now watching the show from the original, probably teenagers watching Happy Days on the first couple seasons. Like the show probably just they geared it down to like kids show necessarily in the beginning.
no,
So
I
as they
don't think
did,
so. It was
so
kind of an offshoot of American Graffiti, right?
yeah, well, yeah, the pilot that you mentioned was actually done for Love American Style, which was like an
Ah,
anthology show at the time. So
yeah,
I guess it was going to be made more like a drama or maybe dramedy as we say it now.
yeah. They
Well,
had,
no, I haven't seen it, so I'd have to check it out. But anyway, I think
yeah. I
definitely
remember it, or
the
I've seen
tone,
it
the
somewhere.
feel definitely changed, and that's part of why you would have a Chachi come in, and why you would say, oh, we have to have a moral or a lesson. So I think that did come out more, in the later years.
Yeah, they did.
On somewhat of a tangent,
Yeah,
before I forget it, because I wrote this stuff down. I'm not going to use it if I don't shoehorn it in somewhere.
right.
There are two other spin-offs, supposed spin-offs from Happy Days. The first one I'll mention is called Blansky's Beauties. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Me either. I don't have it anywhere in my memory. Maybe there'll be a clip on YouTube, but apparently it was supposed to be Howard Cunningham's visiting cousin Nancy Blansky from Las Vegas.
Good Lord.
She was like on one episode, and then they gave her a spinoff. Like that's such a desperate, like, oh, we got to have this character one here, so then we can have a show.
We had that
So,
that stinks of they had a show and they were like, how can we tie this into a very popular
yeah,
thing so we can get at it?
exactly. Yeah. So, we could take the very cynical route, and we'd probably be right in this instance because right at like a week after that episode dropped, Blansky's Beauties premiered
Wow,
the very next week.
that's wild. So they
So
had it
here,
planned.
yeah, yeah. So here's the premise. Nancy Blansky is a longtime Las Vegas showbiz vet since the 50s, since the show she originally started on was in the 50s,
That's nuts.
and current den mother to a bevy of beautiful Las Vegas showgirls. Well, I just copied that out of Wikipedia. I never use bevy in my normal, everyday parlance, but
Unless it's late and you're like, I really
yeah,
have to go to bevy.
I got a lot of edibles. I'm saying bevy everywhere. So it says, in addition to keeping order in the chaotic apartment complex where they all live, Nancy states the girls' big numbers at the Oasis Hotel. Now, get this. This show was set in contemporary, like 1977.
So did the
So
same actress play her?
I believe so.
So
I
she was a time traveler.
so it's like so she just did like a Mork from Mork, made one appearance and ended up on a show in like the 70s. Like they didn't
Somebody would write
care.
and ask them, so how was it that she was in her late 40s, early 50s in 1957, but then the show happens and she's exactly the same age in 1978,
Seven
and
or 78, yeah. So
they would
she
just
just did.
say, repeat to yourself, it's just a show. I should really just
Yeah. I
relax.
don't know. Guys, these guys running these shows back then, they didn't care.
No.
At least we think they didn't care. However, now let me read you the other, like as tenuous as that one was to being a spinoff.
All
Let me
right.
read you this one.
All right, shoot.
All right, here's the premise of the show. Random, an angel in training, is assigned to live with and act as guardian angel for a suburban Chicago family, as well as work as a high school teacher.
So an angel's a high school teacher and works with a family, and
He's an angel in training. He's assigned to live with this family in Chicago, and it's like a single mom raising her kids. So you got a one day at a time element in here too.
so how is this a tie-in with Happy
Well,
Days?
okay, here it comes. And this was also set in that contemporary period of the late 70s. The first episode of the series was broadcast about a week prior to an episode of Happy Days, which is probably what got everything confused. Because if you saw it in the right order, you'd say, obviously, once again, another pathetic attempt of, having a character branch off from a show. So a week after this Out of the Blue show appeared, you saw the Happy Days episode where the same character appears.
So they're
Which
just assuming that people will make the leap that the character so was the character in Happy Days an angel? What
yeah,
was it?
he was it was the same actor playing the same character on Happy Days.
All right, let me.
So it's basically people think, well, it's controversial because their show started and then this Happy Days episode has supposedly the same character. And really what we think happened was they showed him out of sequence. Obviously, the intro for this character was all of Happy Days because it's the same formula they used for Polanski's Beauties. And get this, on Out of the Blue, there was a crossover episode with Mork and Mindy. At least that's what the Wikipedia said.
Wow, that blows my mind. So you've got the science fiction of
Yeah.
an alien from outer space who ages backwards, by the way, and comes from it was born fully formed out of an egg, and he meets an angel from God's heaven,
Yes.
who I mean, how in the world did
I
they
know. I
even?
know. Yeah.
Wow.
It's literally back then they could just make a show, just make 8 episodes and see what happens. But here's the gist of it. 12 episodes were made, and of that, only 8 of them were run. The last 4 were never aired.
Wow. How bad do you have to be to
Exactly. So my point when I'm looking at my notes here, I said, that's so bad. The execs had to pull their fat faces out of some of the best Colombian blow ABC could afford and do something about this.
uh, uh, Gary Marshall, pulls his face. Hey man, listen, dude, I've got one for you. Okay. This one character that showed up, we just had him. I like that actor. He's got some prime stuff, man. Acapulco Gold, and he's got this basically the purest snow you can have. Let's just make up something. Hell, I don't know. He's an angel that lives with a family, and
Hey
I don't know.
man, and if he's an angel because they have lost their faith and they need this angel to reconnect them, man.
Wow,
Yeah.
man.
And then at that point you're because it's cocaine, not pot. They immediately go on a large rant,
Yeah, they stay up for
running around
three
the room.
nights hallucinating.
Yeah, but
Jesus.
yeah. So I just figured, so it's so bad that like at some point on the eighth episode, like okay, we're done. We can't continue.
When they run out of Coke, they're like, "Oh, God, this is terrible. I didn't have any idea."
We did what? Like,
How much money did this? $7 million. What the hell?
yeah, yeah. They cancel it, and then when they go to the next, their next big meeting, yeah, that out of the blue. Oh, yeah, I see where you had to cancel that. You're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, the show out of the blue. Like, there was no out of the blue.
What
It
is
just
this your
totally,
signature? Looks like it. Well, you don't remember that? I had a cold
yeah. And
for
that'd be
six.
something if they had to go, oh, dude, I had this horrible dream that we made this show with an angel in training. And we had him with some people, but he also had to be a teacher.
I mean,
Can you believe?
that's a
Yeah.
long ways off from a show that, like, for example, to get back to the goodness of Happy Days. In one episode, Fonzie had found this kid. Fonzie's never been married. He's never gonna, didn't figure he'd ever have a family or anything. And he meets this kid whose dad had just come back. I guess his parents had been separated or whatever the case. And this kid becomes enamored with the Fonz, and the feeling's mutual. So, Fonz buys him a leather jacket, and they hang out, and Fonz is having a good time. Well, the kid's father shows up and is like at Al's, "Hey kid, hey sport, it's time to go." And he's like, "I'm not going with you." He's like, "Well, yeah, your mother and I, remember, we're taking you to the park." "I don't want to go with you. I want to be with the champ here." It's what he called the Fonz.
Mhm.
And he tells him, he's like, "Oh, you must be Fonzarelli." He's like, "Yeah, yeah, that's me." And he's like, "Yeah, well, I'm here to take my kid to school." And he's trying to argue with his kid. His kid's protesting. He doesn't want to be with him. So the kid's like, "I don't want to go." Fonz is like, "Leave the kid alone." He's like, "Well, this is my son. Are you going to come in between me and my son?" And Fonzie realized what he was going to do. And he stands up and is like, "Yeah, well, you want to fight about it?" And Richie hears him and runs over and is like, "Fonz, I can't believe you're going to." And he's like, "Stay out of this, Cunningham." And he challenged the kid's father to a fight. I think that was one of the reasons why the kid didn't respect his father, was that he viewed him as a coward or whatever.
Mhm.
And so he tells Fonzie, he's like, "Okay, well, I don't want to fight you, but if I have to fight over my son, let's do it." And he kind of comes towards Fonzie, who then backs up, puts his hands up, and is like, "No, no, no, don't hurt me, don't hurt me, don't hurt me." And everybody's shocked, and he's like, "Just take your son and go. Sorry, I just don't want you to get hurt." And the kid sees that the Fonz is a coward, and so he's like, "I'll go with you, Dad. You're a real hero." And the guy picks his son up, and they start to walk out, and he stops and turns around to Fonzie, who's heartbroken because of what he had to just give up.
Mhm.
And the guy mouths "thank you" to the Fonz, who nods. So it was clear that he did that on purpose, so that kid would lose his interest in the Fonz, even though
Mhm.
his pride was
But
on
then
the
the
line.
kid, but then the kid is aware that it was a ruse.
Yeah, so then he doesn't trust anyone for the rest of his life, and
Yeah, exactly. So
ends
he
up
ended up in therapy for years. He didn't know what was real.
he ends up becoming a politician. Just no
Yeah,
soul
yeah,
whatsoever.
yeah.
So
or worse, a telemarketer.
oh my God. Yes. So we're gonna wrap this up because we're starting to run out of time, and we went long as we always do, because who cares? We enjoy talking to each other, and we
Yeah,
loved Happy Days.
this has been great. Yeah, we went a little long between this and the last episode. We apologize, but hey, we were slacking. And what else would you expect?
Yes, that's what Gen X is all about. Watching terrible B-rated shows that do not age well and slacking off.
Yep.
But what do you
Yep.
expect from a group of people who, grew up liking the Fonz, who was 30-year-old banging 14-year-olds? So
Yeah, that's wow. Yeah, when you really parse it down, it's like, man, hey Winkler, you're a Yale drama school graduate.
right.
Do you think that's what you're going to be known for?
Yeah, you could. Fonz is the first legal pedophile on television.
Yeah,
Hey.
he just was so charming. You just let him do anything.
When they arrest him, he's they take the picture of him for his mugshot, and then the flash is real bright. So he's like, "Hey,
Yeah, and the mayor's like, hey, what are you going to do? Yeah, I let him finger me once. It's.
hey, weren't you the guy who had the desk in your toilet? I think we could probably get you off on insanity plead here because something's
Yeah.
not right with you. Coolest guy to ever live."
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Getting off the darkness for a moment. Yeah. It was like that character where, like, well, once again, Henry Winkler, salt of the earth, he just was such a great actor that this little Jewish guy could seem like he's, the coolest stud in the world.
Yeah, if you ever
And
get a chance, people, and you too, Maddie, if you haven't seen
yeah.
it, Arsenio Hall does an interview with Henry Winkler, and this is in the '90s, right, early '90s, and he's talking to him, and he's like, it's wild. I mean, sitting here talking to you and hearing how you are and how you interact, and you're like a 5'5" Jewish guy, and then you're playing this Italian tough guy, and it's how do you do it? And Henry Winkler
Oh,
is
acting.
talking, and then he says, well, you just get into the character, and he cuts it. I mean, I sound more like Rodney Dangerfield, but he's
Yeah.
like he becomes the Fonz
Yeah.
right in front of your face. It is
Mhm.
wild.
Yeah. I've seen him even in recent years where he can snap into it. And you don't even think about the fact that it's this, 70 odd year old guy in front of you. You immediately start thinking, oh my God, it's the Fonz. He's
I
like
mean,
transforming in front of your eyes.
it's wild. If you ever get a chance, anybody to go and look up on Henry Winkler on Arsenio Hall and watch him just instantly turn into the Fonz, and it's like, yeah, I know it's acting, but damn, he's like so different from what he really is, and it was like that.
Yep. So I think that's what drew us all in. Even when he was a side character, you knew there was something about this guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Just, yeah, charismatic as hell.
Yeah, and that's why it became basically the Fonzie show,
Yes, for good or bad.
for good or bad. So on that note, folks, thanks for listening to yet another very special episode of the
The
Rusty
Rusty
Playground.
Playground, a
Yes.
Gen X centric podcast. And
And
by that, I mean two Gen Xers are doing this podcast.
but that's all that matters because I'm just a brainstem floating in a void, imagining all this happening anyway. So
Yes. See, you came up with that before anybody even thought of, hey, maybe we are a simulation. We're living in the Matrix.
I know I tell people that and they're like, yeah, yeah, whatever. It's like,
Yeah, I
seriously.
can tell you. Yeah, I will, put my hand on a stack of Bibles, whichever ones you wanted me to put them on, and I'll tell you, this man said, "What if we're all just brainstems floating in a void?" I'm pretty sure you said it on our way back from Hibbs
Oh yeah, yeah, because I
after some beef stroganoff or something.
yeah,
Something,
maybe it was the chemicals.
yeah, something diarrhea causing surely as they're walking back, and once your bowels are loosening,
Yeah,
kind of gets you going. It's like as if you had just done peyote or something.
you could eat a block of cheese from commissary there at VCU and end up having explosive diarrhea. It doesn't block you up.
You know,
Everything was diarrhea, folks. We could have used the
and
bathroom
with
at the
that,
Fonz's
yes,
office.
yes, yes. So folks, just remember this: don't make a bathroom your office.
No. And if you
And
do, lock the door.
yes, please.
And on that
And
note,
a courtesy flush.
yes. And if you really don't like the guy, then put toilet paper down and then do your business on that. So there's no water to even keep it from, it's like quadruple stink.
Yes, and finally, on that note, he is Vannyboy,
And he's Mattyman.
and you've listened to the Rusty Playground once again. Peace out.
Bye bye.